James Cartwright was more than just a successful businessman. He was a man who had meticulously built his life from the ground up. Every brick of his luxurious home symbolized the years of tireless effort, calculated risks, and unwavering determination that had propelled him to the top of the corporate world. His estate, nestled in an upscale neighborhood, was not just a place to live. It was a testament to his triumph over adversity, a space where he could escape the chaos of boardrooms, financial negotiations, and cutthroat competition. The sprawling property, with its immaculate landscaping, high-tech security system, and breathtaking architectural design, was not only a reflection of his wealth but also his personal sanctuary, one that he had earned through sheer persistence. For James, this home wasn't just another investment in his portfolio. It was the culmination of decades of hard work, a fortress of comfort where he could truly be at peace. But that peace was about to be shattered in an instant. Tea started as a seemingly routine afternoon. James was in his study, reviewing quarterly reports, when a sharp knock at the door interrupted his concentration. He wasn't expecting visitors, but given his high-profile status, surprise guests were not uncommon. As he opened the door, two men in crisp business attire stood before him, their faces unreadable, their demeanor unervingly formal. One of them held a folder, its contents unknown but clearly important. "Mr. Cartwright, we regret to inform you that you are in violation of multiple HOA regulations," the man announced, his voice steady but with a hint of forced authority. "Per community guidelines, you have 24 hours to vacate the premises before legal action is taken." James stared at them, his mind momentarily blank. Violations? HOA rules? Vacate his home? The very suggestion was absurd. He had lived in this neighborhood for years, adhered to every regulation, and paid his dues promptly. The men extended a set of documents, their legal jargon cold and impersonal. Confusion turned into a slow-burning rage as he skimmed the paperwork. Something wasn't right. James was not a man easily intimidated. He had faced aggressive corporate takeovers, ruthless competitors, and high-stakes business deals where millions were at risk. But nothing had ever felt as personal, as invasive, as this moment. "This is a mistake," he stated firmly, his voice edged with barely restrained anger. "I have never violated any HOA rules. I want to speak to the HOA board immediately." The two men exchanged glances before one of them responded with a smirk. "There is no mistake, Mr. Cartwright. If you fail to comply, legal proceedings will commence, and your assets may be seized." The arrogance in their tone made his blood boil. But more than that, it set off alarm bells in his mind. Something wasn't adding up. He knew every member of the HOA board, had personally reviewed their bylaws, and had never received so much as a warning before this. This wasn't just a bureaucratic oversight, it felt deliberate. Calculated. Someone wanted him out, and they wanted it done fast. But why? And more importantly, who? James's instincts, honed through years of business negotiations, screamed at him that this was no ordinary eviction notice. There was something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface. He had spent a lifetime trusting his gut, and it had never failed him before. He took a closer look at the documents handed to him, his sharp eyes scanning every detail. There were inconsistencies, subtle but undeniable. The letterhead bore the HOA's official logo, but the formatting seemed off. The signatures at the bottom belonged to individuals he had never seen at any HOA meeting. The supposed infractions cited were vague, lacking any specifics on how he had supposedly violated the community's regulations. Then there was the timing, 24 hours to vacate? That was unheard of. Normally, HOA disputes involved hearings, warnings, and multiple opportunities to resolve issues. This wasn't an enforcement of rules, it was an execution order meant to displace him before he could react. But James wasn't a man who accepted orders without question. If someone was trying to force him out, they had picked the wrong target. James took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. Panic and anger wouldn't solve this mystery. Logic and action would. If someone thought they could push him out of his own home with forged documents and intimidation tactics, they were in for a rude awakening. He had built his fortune by being relentless, by outmaneuvering those who underestimated him. And right now, he was being severely underestimated. He wasn't just going to ignore this eviction notice. He was going to tear it apart piece by piece. The first step: gathering information. He needed to contact the official HOA board, confirm the authenticity of these so-called agents, and find out who was really behind this scheme. But he wouldn't stop there. James Cartwright had fought too hard to build his sanctuary. He wasn't about to let a couple of fraudulent businessmen steal it from him. This wasn't just about his home anymore. It was about standing up to corruption, exposing deception, and proving that power belonged to those who fought for what was right. And he was more than ready for the fight ahead. James wasted no time. He immediately called the HOA's official office, bypassing the so-called agents still lingering outside his home. A woman answered, her voice professional but unfamiliar. "Yes, I'm calling regarding an urgent matter. I need to confirm the status of my property and any alleged violations against it," James stated, his tone firm. There was a brief pause before she responded, "Mr. Cartwright, we don't have any record of violations against your property." His grip on the phone tightened. That was all the confirmation he needed. Whoever those men were, they weren't acting on behalf of the HOA. "Are you certain?" he pressed. "2 men just showed up at my house with an eviction notice." The woman hesitated. "That's highly unusual. HOA policy requires written warnings and board hearings before any action is taken. No one should be issuing eviction notices like that." James felt a surge of vindication. Someone was running a scam, and they expected him to roll over without question. They had no idea who they were dealing with. James knew that fraud, especially at this level, wasn't random. There was always a financial angle, always someone poised to benefit. He had spent his career uncovering hidden motives in business deals, and this situation was no different. He started with public records, digging into property ownership data and HOA board meeting minutes. What he found was disturbing. Over the past few years, several homeowners had been forced out of the neighborhood under similar suspicious circumstances. Their properties had been snapped up at shockingly low prices by a development firm called Silvercrest Holdings. James's gut clenched. He knew that name. The company was run by a group of local businessmen notorious for underhanded real estate tactics, intimidation, forged documents, and bribed officials. And now, they had set their sights on him. The question was, why? His property was valuable, yes, but something told him there was more to this than just another shady land grab. James dug deeper, pulling every document he could find on his home, the neighborhood, and the HOA. What he discovered was staggering. Not only did he legally own his house, but he also held the majority share of land ownership within the community. Even more shocking, he was technically the majority shareholder of the HOA itself, a detail buried in old agreements he had signed when first moving in, long before the current board had taken over. That meant he had far more control than he realized. If the businessmen behind Silvercrest Holdings were trying to seize land for development, his property was the linchpin in their plan. They needed him out of the way to move forward. But now that he knew the truth, their entire scheme was in jeopardy. James wasn't just fighting for his home anymore. He was standing in the way of a massive, well-orchestrated fraud. As James strategized his next move, a knock at his door startled him. He opened it to find his elderly neighbor, Laura Whitmore, standing there, her expression troubled. "James, can we talk?" she asked in a hushed tone. He welcomed her inside, and she wasted no time getting to the point. "I've seen this before," she whispered. "You're not the first they've done this to." James listened intently as she recounted how, over the years, Silvercrest Holdings had been systematically forcing out homeowners. They would fabricate HOA violations, manipulate documents, and even bribe county officials to make it look legal. The previous HOA president had mysteriously resigned, replaced by people who seemed to be working directly with Silvercrest. "I tried to warn people," Laura said, her voice shaking. "But no one would listen. They were scared. Some took buyouts. Others were just forced out." James felt a cold fury settle over him. Now he had a witness, a credible one, and with her help, he could expose the entire operation. James wasn't just going to defend himself, he was going to dismantle the entire corrupt operation. He contacted a real estate attorney and handed over every piece of evidence he had collected. Together, they prepared a legal assault that would leave no room for escape. But James knew that legal battles could be slow, and time was of the essence. He needed to apply immediate pressure. That's when an idea struck him. He had spent years leveraging media connections for business deals. Why not use those same connections now? He reached out to an investigative journalist he trusted, feeding them the story of widespread fraud, intimidation, and the unlawful evictions happening in his community. The journalist was immediately interested. "This could be huge," they told him. "If we can verify everything, this could turn into a major scandal." That was exactly what James wanted. The more public attention he brought to this case, the harder it would be for Silvercrest Holdings to sweep their crimes under the rug. The battle had officially begun. James knew that the power of public scrutiny could be just as effective as a courtroom battle. Within hours of speaking to the journalist, the first article hit the news. The headline was bold and damning: "Homeowners under siege, fake HOA agents and fraudulent evictions plague local community." The story detailed how fraudulent businessmen were exploiting HOA rules, forging documents, and using intimidation tactics to drive residents from their homes. The article included anonymous testimonies from affected homeowners, some of whom James had tracked down in his investigation, along with a damning history of Silvercrest Holdings' questionable dealings. James read through the published piece with satisfaction, knowing that this was only the beginning. Calls from reporters and news stations flooded in, and suddenly, his fight wasn't just his own anymore. His case had become a citywide scandal, and people were demanding answers. The pressure was mounting, and James knew that his enemies were starting to feel the response from Silvercrest Holdings and their corrupt allies was swift and aggressive. That very evening, James received a cease and desist letter from their lawyers, demanding that he retract his false and defamatory claims. He scoffed at the threat. They were panicking, which meant they knew they were losing control of the narrative. Shortly after, James noticed unfamiliar cars parked near his house, their tinted windows making it impossible to see inside. His security cameras caught figures lurking around the property at odd hours, and Laura reported similar strange activity near her home. James tightened security, ensuring that every inch of his property was monitored. He wasn't afraid, but he knew that desperate people did desperate things. Silvercrest Holdings had everything to lose if he exposed their corruption, and he fully expected them to escalate their tactics. What they didn't realize, however, was that he had already anticipated their every move. With his lawyer by his side, James filed a lawsuit against Silvercrest Holdings, the fake HOA agents, and the corrupt board members who had facilitated the fraud. The charges were severe: real estate fraud, document forgery, illegal intimidation, and conspiracy. His legal team had gathered enough evidence to make an airtight case, and with the media shining a spotlight on the situation, the court had no choice but to fast-track the proceedings. When the defendants were served with the lawsuit, the fallout was immediate. Some of the HOA board members resigned overnight, clearly unwilling to go down with the sinking ship. Others doubled down, issuing public statements claiming that James was a disruptive homeowner trying to sabotage community leadership. But the evidence didn't lie, and as soon as legal proceedings began, it became clear that Silvercrest Holdings had left a long trail of fraudulent activity that was impossible to explain away. The trial was explosive. Prosecutors presented damning evidence: falsified eviction notices, doctored HOA meeting records, and even emails between Silvercrest executives discussing how to push James out. Witnesses came forward, including homeowners who had been forced out in similar schemes. Laura, despite her frail health, took the stand and delivered a powerful testimony about how the neighborhood had been manipulated for years. The fake HOA agents were identified as private contractors hired to intimidate residents, and under legal pressure, one of them flipped, admitting on record that they had been paid to fabricate violations and threaten homeowners. James sat in the courtroom, watching as his adversaries squirmed under the weight of their crimes. He had spent his life negotiating in boardrooms, but this was a different kind of victory. This was justice. The verdict was swift and brutal. The court ruled in favor of James, declaring all eviction notices and fraudulent HOA regulations null and void. Silvercrest Holdings was ordered to pay hefty fines and return properties that had been illegally acquired. Several executives faced criminal charges, while the corrupt HOA board members were permanently removed from their positions. But beyond the courtroom victory, something even more important happened. His neighbors, once afraid to speak up, found their voices. Inspired by James's fight, they came together to rebuild their HOA with transparency and fairness. The community that had once been manipulated by greed and corruption was now stronger, unified by the realization that they had the power to protect their homes. As James stood on his front porch, watching his neighbors celebrate their victory, he knew that his sanctuary was truly safe. Not just because of legal rulings or public exposure, but because the people who lived there had reclaimed their power.